just last week I was having a conversation out the back there with Matilda, who was 9, and someone else who was in their 30s about who was the greatest wrestler of all time. And Steve asserted, of course, it was Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I thought it should be The Rock, and Matilda had other ideas, and I'm like, I've never heard of that dude, so it can't be important. But what a fascinating conversation about wrestling, and then here we are talking about the greatest and only wrestling match in the whole of the Bible. Jacob had tried to run away from his problems 20 years before, and he ran with these words ringing in his ears from his brother, "I'm going to kill you." This time, God let him run away from more problems that he had encountered up the road in Padan Aram. But you can't run away from your problems forever, and you certainly cannot run away from God. Now comes the reckoning. Jacob is given eyes to see through the veil separating heaven and earth, and he encounters an encampment of Malachim, angels, messengers of the Lord. When we encounter angels either in the Bible stories or in our daily lives, be on alert. Something big is about to happen, either to you in your life or in the world around you, or both. Malachim often appear as young men, and in the Bible times often dressed in white. This encounter with the angels prompts Jacob to send ahead to sound out his brother, and what he hears horrifies him. While Jacob's been out the back of nowhere for the last 2 decades playing wife swap, Padan Aram style, dueling with dodgy Uncle Boss, and chasing sheep and goats around the bush. And yes, all that toughened him up to an extent, and yes, it all made him ridiculously wealthy. But what has his brother Esau been doing for the last 2 decades while he's been doing all that? Esau has been honing his craft in killing, building a private army of seriously dangerous men who are also good at marauding and killing. Hearing about the caravan encroaching on their territory, Esau and his troops have mobilized and are en route. Jacob's rightly terrified. He's not equipped to deal with this. He starts by sending word about his wealth, trying to smooth the way even before he knows about the army, because he knows that his brother wanted to kill him. But who is he kidding, really? He is trying to buy off the one bloke in his life he knows cannot be bought. 2 decades earlier, he had bought Esau's birthright, his right to inherit all of his father's goods and things and money. He bought it all for a bowl of red lentil stew, which said that Esau does not care about money or things or status or position or even people. Jake knows the truth. He's going to die. And if he doesn't play it right, they're all going to die. So, in his terror, he splits his collection of people and livestock, this massive, slow-moving target, into 2 to increase the odds of survival. He prays what is a pretty good prayer, and I'd encourage you to go home and read it again. It's a good example of how to pray. Not quite sure Jacob meant it, but it's a good template on how to pray when you're in real trouble. He reminds God that this was his idea. He humbles himself before the Lord. He asks for the Lord to save him. He reminds God of all of his promises that he's made to him. But then he also sends wave after wave of ever-increasing bribes in a desperate, all-in attempt to buy Esau off, even though he's pretty sure it won't work. And he puts distance between himself and all of his family, workforce and fortune, so at last he is utterly alone. The question I can't find an answer to is, was this a selfless act of a changed man, believing his family were better off without him? They had a better chance of survival without him? because he alone was the target of Esau's rage and hatred? Or was this the last-ditch attempt of a selfish man using his family and goods as a human shield? We'll never know. Whatever the case, just like that night 20 years before at Bethel, when a portal opened between heaven and earth and Jacob encountered the living God, Jacob had lost everything except the shirt on his back. And he was completely and utterly alone before the Lord. What do we take away from such a mysterious and unusual encounter as this for ourselves today? Well, the church has talked a lot about wrestling with God, grabbing a hold of him and not letting go before you get a blessing from him. And it is right to come to him and argue with him and fight with him and pray to him, but never let go, because God is our only source of life and blessing in this universe. So it's right to talk about that. Are you striking some kind of difficulty or drama, or have you been hurt, been crushed by life? Grab onto God and absolutely do not let go. He is the only way you will find your way through it. We rightly major on grace in the church. Everything is a gift from God. But we talk about God as though he's some kind of big, fluffy, cuddly panda who will give you a free ride on all your badness and rottenness. You'll turn a blind eye to the way you've ignored him all this time. We don't have room in our thinking about God, our theology, for the God who will pick a fight with us, who will blindside us with a body slam in a midnight brawl, who will hit you harder physically, spiritually and emotionally than Stone Cold Steve Austin in order to knock some sense into you. Jacob was not really ready to work for God, not really ready to become a nation, a legend across time, until he had fought God, until he had won, until he had received a life-altering injury from him. This encounter is God's answer to his prayer, God save me. Think about that. Only after this episode with a permanent limp from a bout with the Lord is he ready to be renamed Israel, one who strives with God. Is everything truly a gift from God? How about being punched below the belt by him and being dealt a permanent disabling injury? Every single step Jacob would take for the rest of his life would be a painful reminder of this night and of his salvation. Every time he rolled over in bed, every time he stood up or sat down, he would be reminded of his own sinfulness and greed that led to this night. He would be reminded of the Lord's blessing and goodness as well, and how he was prepared to come and sort him out face to face, personally. And that was a good thing, a gift from God, a sign of his love, tough as it was. What about the hard things that have happened to us? Where did they come from? Some of them are just the blind happenings that occur to us in a sinful world filled with sinful people. Horrible things are committed against us and done to us by horrible people, or stupid circumstances caused by a sinful world. But what will we take out of them? Because we believe in a God who can bring life from death, order from chaos. Surely those episodes are not completely lost and completely useless and evil, but that God might draw some good out of them. But not every bad, what we consider a bad thing happens to us is caused by this sinful world. God comes at us to transform us. And sometimes we might need a smack up the side of the head or a body slam in the middle of the night. This is the truth about God. He comes to us bodily and wrestles with us and our sin, and it kills him. And he walks away with eternal wounds in his own hands and his own side, there forever, to show us that it need not be the end of us or for us. Jake ran off to Padan Aram to live his best life, to marry the hottest chick, to make some coin and live happily ever after. Despite his encounter with God, and in spite of his own promises to him, because he proceeded to live the next 20 years like as if God wasn't real, la la la, I'm not listening. Well, nearly 20 years. When he did strike real trouble, he actually started listening to him, and he started to have a way out, which we talked about last week. But mostly, Jake lived with God at arm's length. For 14 years, he did it all by himself, and he only turned to God and listened when he was really caught in a jam. Are we any different? Those of us who call ourselves Christians, we can come to church Sunday by Sunday, but mostly we're just like, la, 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 whatever, God. I'm busy doing my own thing. I've got my own goals and plans. I'm going to see my own way through, thank you. In today's episode, Jacob is truly in fear for his life, and he is finally driven to pray for salvation. Jake has essentially been living as a self-centered and idolatrous man, just as bad as his uncle Laban up to this point. Life is all about him and what he can control and manipulate. And at points he even tries to manipulate God himself as though he is some kind of idol, an action figure on a shelf. Truth is, everyone can all too easily slide into that way of living. And we make God who we want him to be, and not the other way round. Having your hip dislocated will remind Jacob that that ain't the case. The very first theology text we were issued at Bible college was this, because they know this is a real problem, especially for people who professionally talk about God and lead people in the ways of God as a life, as a calling, as a vocation. They tried to knock some sense into us straight out of the gate. The trivialization of God, the dangerous illusion of a manageable deity. You cannot manage God. You cannot tell him who he is. He tells you who you are. He names you, and he will sort you out. Visit a church on any Sunday morning. This is the first words in the book. Almost any will do, and you will likely find a congregation comfortably relating to a God who fits nicely within precise doctrinal positions, or who lends almighty support to social crusades or conforms to individual spiritual experiences. But you will not likely find such much awe or a sense of mystery. The only sweaty palms will be those of the preacher unsure of whether the sermon will go over. The only shaking knees will be those of the soloist about to sing the offertory, or I'd probably add the treasurer counting the money. The New Testament warns us, offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. But reverence and awe have been replaced by a yawn of familiarity. The consuming fire has been domesticated into a candle flame, adding a bit of religious atmosphere perhaps, but no heat, no blinding light, no power for purification. When the true story gets told, whether in a partial light of historical perspective or in the perfect light of eternity, it may well be revealed that the worst sin of the church at the end of the 20th century has been the trivialization of God. Why do people in churches seem like cheerful, brainless tourists on a package tour of the absolute? On the whole, I do not find Christians outside the catacombs, in persecution, sufficiently sensible of the conditions. Does anyone have the foggiest idea what sort of power we so blithely invoke, or, as I suspect, does no one believe a word of it? The churches are children playing on the floor with their chemistry sets, mixing up a batch of TNT to kill a Sunday morning. It is madness to wear ladies' straw hats and velvet hats to church. We should all be wearing crash helmets. Ushers should issue life preservers and signal flares. They should lash us to our pews, for the sleeping God may wake someday and take offence, or the waking God may draw us out to where we can never return. Or in light of today's reading, the waking God may body slam us and have to cripple us in order for us to finally be useful to him. We prefer the illusion of a safer deity, so we have pared God down into more manageable proportions. Our era has no exclusive claim to the trivialisation of God. And then he goes on to relate the incident of the golden calf. At face value, Jacob seems to be on track in our story, and he's starting to rely on God, but clearly he was not. He was saying the right things, he was finally doing the right things, but was he really in the right place? No. Or he wouldn't need such a drastic intervention, a hit below the belt and a permanent debilitating injury to remind him for the rest of his life. Paul knew this for himself as well. And this is why he writes in the way he does in his letters. He knew the story of Jacob, and he himself was blinded by the Lord on the road to Damascus. He was healed of that blindness, the spiritual and physical blindness, but years later he struggled with an incurable illness, a medical condition that we don't know what it was, but it made life hard every single day for him. He prayed 3 times for God to heal him, and God came back and said to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." I know this myself. Did God cause my Crohn's disease at 23? Probably not. Probably it was my own sinfulness or a genetic straw that I pulled that was the worst one to possibly draw. But in my encounter with God, there's been nothing but good drawn from the suffering over the last 26 years or 27 years. And God himself has said to me audibly, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." You cannot ignore God indefinitely. You can't manage without him. You cannot manage him with occasional bursts of do-gooding or piety, or throwing up prayers of desperation and then going back to your regular programming 5 minutes later. God's love for you is fierce, is passionate. It costs him everything. But he is Lord, and he is in charge. He will give his life away for you, but he will have his way in your life according to his plan and purpose for you. And he will get through to you at all costs. That's why Israel emerges without sooking, limping, and telling the tale of Peniel and of how he saw God face to face and lived with his blessing. The Lord be with you.